Good evening, Professor Jaffrelot. I'm very happy to interview you about a book that was 10 years in the making. In the past 10 years, in our conversations, you referred repeatedly to this book, but it never came out. And I'm very happy that it finally did and that I got to read it. It's actually quite rare to have a book in the making for such a long time. And you write in the two prefaces that you wrote, one in 2013 and the other one in 2023, that it was a high-risk manuscript 10 years ago. And you show in this book what was already known more than 10 years ago, in 2013, a year before Narendra Modi was elected as Prime Minister of India. So my first question, or my first remark, would be that information and access to information is maybe not really the issue, explaining the rise of authoritarianism. After all, the facts are known and have been known for quite a while. They've been documented by social scientists, by NGOs, by journalists. So is this book your piece of resistance as a public intellectual against erasure through censorship? In other words, why did you feel the need, or I'd say the urge after 10 years, to actually publish this book?
Well, I felt that need primarily as an academic. It's an academic book. It's a book that fits in theories of authoritarianism, theories of national populism. But yes, academics are also public intellectuals. At least academics cannot abstain from saying what they know when they know something that is important academically, but also for the general public, for, yes, something that the French have cultivated, intellectuals, at the end of the day, is a word that was coined in France, in indeed resistance, something that Émile Zola initiated during the Dreyfus affair, and that has been repeatedly, I would say, reiterated. So these are the two faces of the same coin. Academics and public intellectuals have some responsibility academically for the knowledge, for the education of students, scholars, and they have also some responsibility vis-a-vis society at large. So I had to do it, and yes, it took me more time than I thought.
Your book is entitled Gujarat Under Modi. You write about, and you're not the only one, but you were certainly one of the first ones to write that Gujarat was a laboratory for India at large.
Yeah.
So that's the word you mentioned in the title, but there are other words: test site, crucible. Gujarat has this very particular place now in the history of India.
Yeah.
It's always had a very particular place, but now even more so politically. Can you sum up, I mean, it's a huge question, but can you sum up the particular regional, economic, political, and caste-based context that enabled Gujarat to turn into what could be qualified as Modi land?
Yeah. Yeah, laboratory is the word, this phrase, Gujarat as the laboratory of Hindutva is a phrase I coined in 2001. In the second edition of the book I co-edited with Thomas Blomansen, BGP and the Compulsions of Politics. There was a first edition in 1998 and the second edition in 2001. And in 2001, I added one section on Gujarat because we could see what was Keshubhai Patel's Gujarat, the pre-Modi Gujarat. Narendra Modi takes over as chief minister in 2001 September, and already for many years, several years, we had BGP government. Yes, Gujarat indeed was very specific, and a pioneer in the history of India on many occasions. And that's what I find so interesting, because I see things in sequences. You know, there is a dialectic between the rise of BJP, the rise of Hindutva, and the rise of the anti-BJP, the anti-Hindutva forces. So to understand why BJP took over in the 90s and remained in power subsequently, you need to understand what was there before. And what was there before from 2 points of view. One, Congress in post-independence Gujarat is a very different animal from what it is elsewhere, from what it is in UP, from what it is in Bihar. It's a very conservative, well, the dominant faction is very conservative, very pro-Hindutva in many ways. Well, I should not say that. I should say a Hindu traditionalist brand of politics. It's not, they are not Hindu nationalists. They are Hindu traditionalists. And there is a big difference there. They are not explicitly anti-Muslim, anti-minority. They are pro-Hinduism. So they want to restore the Somnath temple. They want to promote the Hindu traditions, cow protection, you know. And that's the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, partly. It's, of course, very much the legacy of Vallabhbhai Patel, of Morarji Desai, of K.M. Munshi. You know, so many Congress leaders in post-independence Gujarat embody this school of thought that is conducive to Hindutva, at least that is not repressing Hindutva. So it was easier for the Hindutva forces to develop in Gujarat. But Congress has another side, a progressive side, very progressive. If you look at Indulal Yagnik, a fascinating figure, embodying the, you can say, yes, progressive, you can even say plebeian face of Congress, a man who fought for Adivasis, who fought for Dalits, who was very much against Vallabhbhai Patel, and who was, by the way, expelled from Congress by Vallabhbhai Patel with the blessing of Mahatma Gandhi. So the first chapter of the book is precisely on this very ambivalent attitude of Congress, which on one side helps Hindutva to take root in Gujarat, and at the same time is antagonizing the upper caste. And caste is the key element in this story, because the legacy of Indulal Yagnik is found in Madhav Singh Solanki. Many years later, in the 80s, we see Mr. Solanki and others inheriting this legacy, deciding to promote low caste, Dalits, OBCs. You know, they create this coalition, CAM, Kshatriyas, Harijans, Adivasis, Muslims. A coalition that will promote, with Mr. Solanki at the helm, reservations many years before Mandal, 10, 15 years before Mandal. And it's in reaction to this very progressive pro-reservationist attitude that we will see the Patels, the Patidars, joining hands with the upper caste and therefore becoming the vote bank of BJP. So in the late 80s, early 90s, we have this transition that is in fact the transition India at large will follow 30, 40 years later. So that's why it is a laboratory. It's a laboratory because Hindutva prospered, flourished in reaction to a pro-plebeian policy that fostered the making of a new kind of coalition. The Patels, the dominant caste, they were behind Congress and they shifted to BJP in reaction to reservations, exactly the way in the 90s, even more in the 2000s, you saw the Jats, the Marathas, so many other caste shifting after Mandal from Congress to BJP.
So you talked about the Hindu Gujarati Asmita, the Gujarati pride, and the Patel vote bank, and their reaction to the reservation policies. What about the business ethos of Gujarat and the industrial political nexus there?
Yeah. Now this is key, of course. Well, it takes us back to caste to some extent, because in Gujarat, the highest caste is, well, Brahmins on the paper, but certainly Vaish in practice. The dominant ethos, the most influential groups are made of businessmen, largely Vaish, Hindu or Jain Vaish, but also Parsis, because there are still Parsi businessmen in the state. Well, and Patels, as you said, Patels are probably the first caste group in India to shift from agriculture to trade and to industry. And this in a very transnational perspective, because they have a large diaspora as well. So it's a very specific trajectory again, and it is definitely one of the reasons why the state is so rich, so dynamic in terms of industrial development, so extroverted in terms of trade. What I find interesting when you look at the politics, the political scene, you see that all congressmen have promoted the business milieu, and there is a real nexus, there is a real porosity between the political leaders and the business milieu. And Congress is very pragmatic. Even Solanki is very pragmatic, making deals with the businessmen. The big difference with the way a man like Solanki dealt with the businessmen and the way BJP, especially under Modi, dealt with the businessmen is this. For decades, big business was not promoted. SMEs. Again, Patel dominated SMEs in many ways, and they helped the backward districts to get industrialized with SMEs, cottage industry. When BJP and especially Narendra Modi took over power, there was big change, and mega project became the order of the day. And therefore, you see a shift. Yes, business remains very important, but you see a shift from small and medium enterprises to big business, big project.
You identified the specificities of Gujarat up until Narendra Modi was elected as chief minister in 2001. But just after that, something happened in Gujarat that that was a turning point. And what I'm referring to are the pogroms of 2002. Of course, it's the dominant discourse in Gujarat itself that those pogroms, which are not always labeled as pogroms, are a turning point. Can you tell us more about what happened then and how it affected politics in Gujarat and Modi's rule?
Certainly. Well, before that, it's very important to remember that Gujarat has been a state where massive communal violence have been recurrent. The largest post-independence communal riot in India took place in Gujarat, and Ahmedabad in particular, 1969. Another equally massive communal violence riot took place in 1985. Then there was one after the Babri Masjid's demolition, 1992. So there is a history of communal violence which made Ahmedabad the riot city par excellence, even more than Bombay if you look at the ratio of casualties per head, so to speak. Yet 2002 is different. And 2002 is different for two reasons. One, of course, the magnitude. The magnitude of this event, not only in terms of casualties, because by certain assessment, the 1969 riot had resulted in an equally large number of casualties, but the magnitude in terms of the groups which have been affected. Till then, riots took place at the periphery of the city, Ahmedabad, or in the Muslim core of the city, the old city, the walled city. So we had not seen attacks on Muslim middle class people. And that's exactly what happened in 2002, when for the first time, middle class people, former IPS officers, lawyers were attacked. And one member of the Muslim elite, Ehsan Jaffrelot, former member of parliament of India, in fact, a man who had been elected on the seat of Indulal Yagnik precisely, was also killed. That is different, and that has had very important consequences in terms of ghettoization of the Muslims. Because from not only the workers, labor neighborhood, old city, but also from Navrangpura, from New Ahmedabad, everybody fled, and many people went to Juapura, a place that has become the largest Muslim ghetto in India, probably half a million people large. So this is different from what we saw before. What is also different is, of course, the political instrumentalization of this event. We all remember the starting point, the Godhra attack on a train taking Karsevaks back from Ayodhya, the fact that 55 people, including women, children, were burnt alive in 2 coaches. After that, there is a political instrumentalization that has resulted in the discourse by Chief Minister Modi saying that that was pre-planned, by people supported by Pakistan, that was pre-planned by ISI officers, and so on and so forth. And on the same evening, if we go by several testimonies, on the 27th of February, a free hand is left to rioters, and police is asked not to intervene. That is something that explains why for 3, 4, 5 days in Ahmedabad, in Gandhinagar, in Baroda, in Surat, but also in the countryside, in many small towns and villages, a real pogrom took place. You know, we can use the word pogrom simply because the state was involved, at least implicitly. And secondly, it was a completely one-sided kind of attack. In a riot, you have a confrontation. In a pogrom, you have a one-way traffic in a way. And among the rioters, we could find so many well-organized, well-disciplined members of the Sangh Parivar, including Bajrang Dal people. So that's why, of course, it's a turning point, because after that, Narendra Modi was in a position to claim that he was the protector of the Hindus, the Hindu Hriday Samrat, the emperor of the Hindu art. And he will capitalize on this politically. So he will offer to resign. He will dissolve the assembly, and he will canvass, and he will make sure that elections will take place. And L.K. Advani, Lal Krishna Advani, as Home Minister, Vice Prime Minister, will help him big way to make sure that the Election Commission agrees to have elections, to organize elections in Gujarat. And this is the turning point for the career of Narendra Modi, because these elections finally take place in December, and he is the big winner. He is the big winner with a very disturbing correlation. Most of the seats won by BJP in Gujarat were located in places that had been badly affected by the communal violence. So the correlation that we all know about, BJP can benefit from polarization. That correlation is demonstrated once again in this particular case.
You just said and wrote that Modi projected himself as the defender of the faith. And it strikes me that it's a title, although you said it in Hindi, it's a title that's usually bestowed, in English at least, upon the English monarch as the head of the Church of England, which brings me this question. Has Narendra Modi personalized and centralized his power so much that he has actually become closer to a king or an emperor than to a prime minister?
Well, as a prime minister, certainly, as a chief minister already. And that's why this is the main theme of the book. What happened in Gujarat can be scaled up at the national level. So this point that you're making, concentration of power in his hands, well, in the hands of few people, in fact, including Amit Shah, who will become his home minister, that's something that takes place immediately after the 2002 elections. And what we see is the pattern, a new pattern, where very few ministers matter, very few. The assembly does not matter anymore, hardly meets. Institutions are weakened, to say the least. Among them, the first target is the police. The policemen who have tried to do their job properly are sidelined. Those who have contributed to the violence, have let this violence happen, are rewarded. And the judiciary. The judiciary is also very much targeted, saffronized. So there is one full chapter in this book on the desinstitutionalization of the state, something we will see at the national level after 2014. A repeat of the same process starts immediately after the 2014 elections at the national level, and sometimes with the same people, the same police officers who were there in Gujarat after 2002, the same IAS officers who were there, the same lawyers who were there, and of course, politicians, including Amit Shah. So, yes, indeed, when elections are won, the way Modi won in 2002 on his own name as the Hindu Hriday Samrat, well, the man who is elected in these conditions becomes a strong man, becomes potentially authoritarian. He has the power. He has been elected. He has the mandate, and now he can exert it freely and sometimes arbitrarily.
this concentration of power that you describe in the hands of a few is actually a break from the precedent, tradition, or practice of Hindu nationalists or Hindu traditionalists who tended to have a more collegial way to share power. So what is now the relationship now and then? I mean, over the past 10, 15 years, what's been the relationship between Narendra Modi and the Sangh Parivar, the Hindu nationalist matrix that he actually emerged from?
Yeah, again, very interesting to compare what happened then and what is the situation now. What happened then was indeed RSS people resented the way he tended to personalize power. They were team players. And RSS was used to see politicians reporting to the organization. A chief minister, a BJP chief minister is supposed to report to the Pran Pracharak, to the RSS in chief at the state level. Mm-hmm. So when in the 2000s, Narendra Modi is asked by no one else but Mohan Vaid, who has become the spokesperson for RSS, the son of Mr. Vaid, G.V. Vaid, who was the man who, in his 90s at that time, was the last one who had seen Ed Gevor, the founder of RSS. So when Mr. Vaid asked Modi to report to him, and when he was told that, no way, Narendra Modi will not report to anybody but to himself, there was a real tension. And this tension peaked in 2007, after, by the way, Mr. Vaid was sent to Chennai, when local RSS leaders preferred not to canvass, not to campaign for Narendra Modi. Not only people from RSS, but people from the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, including Togaria, people from the Bharatiya Kisan Sangh, the Kisan union that was not happy with the way Narendra Modi behaved. And that's a very important moment. Because it shows that Modi could not rely on the traditional support base a chief minister of BJP is supposed to rely upon. Not only for the reasons I've just mentioned, but also because within the BJP party itself, there were big tensions. Keshubhai Patel, who had been replaced by Narendra Modi, was very unhappy with the way Narendra Modi treated him. And he told him, you know, this is a relay race. We are supposed to work together. And that was the reason why you had a real faction fight. And in fact, Keshubhai Patel tried to be elected party president in Gujarat. He failed. He was completely sidelined. What is the lesson we draw from that? Narendra Modi is not a team player. He doesn't want to be he doesn't want to report to the party, to report to the organization. So he had to build his proper parallel power structure. And he had to relate directly to the people. These two things are very important. To relate directly to the people, by the way, this is what Indira Gandhi had to do after 1969, when she lost Congress because of the notables who were not happy with her and who were more on the Congress O side, and they became the Congress O people. You have to be a populist when you don't have a party structure. He had to become an even more active populist. And two, he had to rely on a parallel power structure made of what? Made of spin doctors. The last one will be Mr. Kishore, of course, in 2012. Spin doctors, APCO Worldwide, a PR company based in the US to make his propaganda. So he emancipated himself from the Sangh Parivar and developed a new style, a populist style based on the pieces of advice spin doctors were giving him. So that's why he ended with holograms, a TV channel, Namo, of course, WhatsApp groups, the social media at large. He invented in Gujarat a style he was able to transpose after 2014 at the national level.
You write that Modi has invented a political repertoire of populism, and you just described it. But how is he different from other populist leaders around the world?
Well, there are many affinities with the style of Bolsonaro, Trump, Orban, Erdogan. They have a lot in common, ethno-religious nationalism. That's why they are, for me, national populist. This is clearly a difference with the populist of the left. Populists of the left claim that they speak for all the people. These men claim that they speak in the name of the sons of the soil. The nativist dimension of their repertoire is very important. There is one difference. Most of these leaders belong to more or less secularized societies. Well, you may argue that no, the US is not that secularized, still more than India. And I think it explains why Modi gradually has also become a kind of high priest of Hinduism. So that's something you do not find in most of these characters. He is the only one to preside over the inauguration of a temple the way he did in Ayodhya in January this year. This very deep commitment to religious practice, religious rituals, religious symbols, the way he took part in the Kumbh Mela in Prayag, the way he was photographed in a cave in the Himalayas, that's not something you will see, neither Orban nor Trump, not even Erdogan, not even Netanyahu would do something like that. So I think this is a very important additional source of popularity that may not be very sustainable, but he has been able to use that repertoire as well.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned the business and politician porosity or nexus. And then later on, you alluded to the spin doctors and the different consultants working for Narendra Modi and Narendra Modi's regime. In your book, you explain how the BJP has created a deeper state in Gujarat and later on in India. Can you describe that deeper state?
Yeah, that's very important, probably the most important feature of this system. We know what is a deep state. A deep state is a state where you have actors, players who are not accountable to the public, who influence policies from behind the scene. Typically in Pakistan, the army, at least the ISI, could be seen as a deep state. A deeper state may have a deep state component, but what I mean by that is something else. I mean by that at the grassroots level, we have a dense network of cadres belonging to the Sangh Parivar, not necessarily the BJP, far from that. They may be part of the Bajrang Dal, they may be part of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, they may be part of many other offshoots of the Sangh Parivar, and they do cultural policing. They exert a kind of surveillance over society. Of course, vis-a-vis the minorities in the first place. So they are the vigilantes who will check that there is no cow in the truck of a Muslim farmer when they patrol the highways something they do a lot in Haryana, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh. They'll be also the ones who will check whether young Muslim men are not approaching, trying to seduce Hindu girls. This is their famous love jihad, anti-love jihad program. They will also check whether there is no attempt by Hindus to sell their flat or their house to a Muslim in a mixed neighborhood. At the grassroots level, they keep an eye, and more than that, on how do people behave. They can go further than that. They can also look at caste issues, for instance, intercaste marriages. Well, relations between people of different castes is not something they will take lightly. The same groups do the same, do both. And Bajrang Dal in Gujarat has this tradition of controlling society at the grassroots level. And for me, this is probably the most important transformation of India today, because it means that, yes, it's about politics, certainly. It's about a government that has become xenophobic, that has become majoritarian. But the question I ask is, what happens when this government goes? Are we back to square one? Or do we see these networks at the grassroots level continuing to harass the minorities and check their attitude, their behavior, and continue this cultural policing? This is a very important question mark.
So the greatest casualties of Modi's rule have been intellectuals, journalists, school children through the rewriting of textbooks, Dalits, Adivasis, Christians, and of course Muslims. So what space is there left today for dissent, both in Gujarat and more largely in India?
Well, again, you can certainly see how Gujarat has been a laboratory for what we see in India today. Just one example. Today, we know that national universities, including JNU, have been targeted by the government of India almost immediately after 2014. This is something we saw in Gujarat before with the state universities, including Baroda University, MSU, including, well, almost no exception. Now, what is left for dissent? Well, this is why social media are not, of course, entirely bad. Of course, they are used by politicians and by populists. But it is via social media, in the largest sense of the word, that you see dissent today. When you see YouTube channels watched by hundreds of thousands of people, well, you can consider that, yes, they have certainly captured the mainstream media. Yes, even NDTV, after it was bought by Gautam Adani, has fallen in line. But there is an alternative information circuit. You can get news, proper news, with proper journalists giving you this news via the YouTube channels and other social media. Will that continue? Will certainly depend on the results of the coming elections, of the current elections, because that is not something they will continue to let happen, that they will let continue to happen if they win these elections, I suppose.
Before we come back, maybe for a final word about the elections and their outcome, I'd like to ask you about economics. Modi's favored larger companies, which was a break from what was happening before, with policies favoring the SMEs. He favored big industrialists in what you call a new model of crony capitalism. And he turned Gujarat into a corpo state. And Gautam Adani, who you just mentioned as the buyer and new owner of NDTV, certainly embodies this crony capitalism and corpo state. But given this development, can you explain why the economic vitality of Gujarat, and to a larger extent of India, through this crony capitalism, has not translated into a reduction of inequalities? So to borrow the title of your second chapter, are we talking about development, or are we talking merely about growth?
Well, it's indeed a case of growth without development. That needs to be qualified, but this is by and large the conclusion we reach when we look at the data available. Yes, emphasis on big projects is the trademark of the Modi government in Gujarat. Big projects meaning SEZs in many cases, special economic zones. Gujarat has a record number of SEZs. Under Modi, 60 SEZ had been cleared. Of course, there was a tradition of SEZs in Gujarat before because of the business-oriented attitude of the government. But by contrast, there was only one in Uttar Pradesh, so the gap was very significant. SEZs like the Mundra port that Gautam Adani is allowed to develop in 2003, just after the 2002 pogrom when he supported Narendra Modi. Big project also in terms of infrastructure, roads in particular. Roads have been given a huge priority. And these things helped growth, of course, to happen. Also, if you want to add in this list the energy sector, refineries, well, the largest refinery in India is in Gujarat. But growth without development for two reasons. One, no investment in education, hardly any investment in education, social expenditures, education, health, very low. It's fascinating to compare states which are as rich as Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, for instance, with this state of Gujarat and see the huge difference. The investment in health and education in a state like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, have always been much larger. So that's a big difference. You can't have development without education. It's a different kind of economic trajectory. And secondly, this kind of growth is also largely jobless growth. Why? Because you don't need a lot of people for a refinery. You don't need a lot of people for even a port like Mundra. And not only there are few jobs created, but there are few good jobs. There are even fewer good jobs. And when you compare again Gujarat to other states, you realize that salaries are very low, wages are very low. And that's true also in the rural part of the state, by the way, but definitely in the urban sector. And very few jobs in the formal sector. So you have few jobs, fewer good jobs, and informalization of the economy in a clearly neoliberal perspective to please these cronies. So they have the SEZs, they have workers for little money, cheap labor, and they get sectors of the economy. So that's why I also speak about oligarchs. These cronies are also oligarchs with in a position to capture all sectors of the economy, the energy sector, the transport sector, the port sector. That has been transposed to the national scene. This is fascinating to see the same people, Gautam Adani again, shifting from Gujarat to the national level with the same modus operandi. That is also true of inequalities, because the kind of jobless growth India is experiencing today is equally bad in terms of social development. So the Gujarat model, indeed, well, model, quote unquote, has become nationalized to a large extent after 2014.
And now let's shift maybe a little bit away from Gujarat and look at the larger picture, because the elections are almost concluding, or at least have reached the later phase. And every expert, including yourself, seem to agree that the likeliest outcome is that Narendra Modi wins a third term. Although, of course, there's always an element of uncertainty there. But still, that's the likeliest outcome, it seems. So before asking you, that's going to be my second question, before asking you what could happen once there will be a change of regime, because it's bound to happen as well one day. But before that, if Narendra Modi is re-elected, what are the plans, particularly when it comes to the constitution? Is there a plan to change the constitution of India, to alter the very nature, the very idea of India that was crafted around the time of independence by Nehru?
Yeah. Well, Hindu nationalists have never been happy with this constitution. Of course, they could not say it openly, first of all, because that would have been anti-constitutional. And secondly, because, well, Dr. Ambedkar, being the main author of this constitution, to oppose this piece of work would have alienated the Dalits, and that's something they try hard not to do. But yes, it's not something they appreciated. They said it, some of them said it on many occasions. And if they were in a position to reform, to revise this constitution, I think they would do two things. One, they would remove or erase or dilute its secular character. The word secularism, by the way, is in the preamble. And when they try to eliminate it, they say, oh, it was added in the 70s. We prefer to return to the original constitution. Well, they may just remove the word. They may also, in the same spirit, dilute articles protecting minorities, linguistic as well as religious minorities. There is an article in this constitution saying that minorities are entitled to get subsidies from the state for their schools. That may probably be one of the articles they would try to dilute. And the other thing that probably they would try to do also, if they could revise the constitution, would be to weaken federalism. Already we see the practice of power that Narendra Modi is now routinizing, I would say, since 2014, is very much centralized. For instance, demonetization was decided without consulting any chief minister. The lockdown was decided in few hours, like demonetization, without consulting the chief ministers. That's probably something that would go also along with promotion of Hindi. They have a clearly unitary vision of the state. They want a unitary state. So federalism is not something, it's not their cup of tea, clearly. Would they be able to do that? Very difficult. But they don't need to get 400 seats for going in this direction. And if they don't try even to revise the constitution, they would probably at least introduce something that is very dear to them, and that is a uniform civil code. And for that, you may not need to revise the constitution. In fact, BJP rule states like Uttarakhand have already tried to do it. Now, what about the outcome of these elections? What is introducing a clear factor of uncertainty? Well, I would say three factors. One, the turnout is surprisingly low. For the first time for many years, many years, we see a decline in the turnout. As if BJP voters were not yet prepared to punish the ruling party, but we're not prepared to support it either. So they stay idle. Second factor, the unity of the opposition is resilient. That was a big question we had. Would these parties, the Congress and its state parties, allies, stick together, closed ranks? And more or less they do. And in states like Maharashtra or even West Bengal, it will make some difference. And third, the election campaign of BJP and even of Narendra Modi is very surprising. Very, I would say, disappointing if we look at it from the point of view of a BJP voter. Never before Narendra Modi had promoted issues like communal divides. Of course, we knew that polarization was his main plank, but he never focused on that. He spoke about economic development. 1914, he sold the Gujarat model to everybody. He spoke about security. 2019, that was all about how do we get protected against Pakistan in the wake of the Pulwama's attack. 2024, it's not about the economy. It's not about security, because probably there is nothing to say in favor of economic development, and there is no risk except from China. But precisely, the BJP people are not prepared to say that China is posing a threat to India. So he has to fall back on polarization, majoritarianism. And of course, that's why the Ayodhya temple had to be inaugurated in the first place, for making this election campaign more convincing. But that is not enough. I think that is not enough. And for these three reasons, the outcome of this election, we are in the middle of it, is really uncertain. The bigger question we all have in mind is it a free and fair election? And will we see the Election Commission doing at least the basic things and not betray the voters? The fact that they are re-evaluating the number of voters after 1 week, one phase after the other, is of course arising a lot of suspicion. But you can't steal an election if there is a wave, if there is a real wave, because first of all, opinion polls will tell us. And one day the CSDS and Lognity will give the outcome in one of their surveys. And then we will have a clear disconnect between the official results and opinion polls. So yes, this is what we will have to focus upon now. The election campaign may result in some defeat for BJP. Will this defeat translate into reality?
And finally, as a conclusion, regardless of the outcome of the election, what was created in the laboratory of Gujarat has evolved, has scaled up, and now that it has scaled up for more than 10 years at the national level, or 10 years, let's say. How is it possible to recover from it?
Yeah. Well, this is a question that is posed by this notion of the deeper state. It's not only a political question, it's also a societal question that we have to analyze. I'm confident that the point of no return has not been reached, but we have to look at this situation state-wise, because in some regions, the influence of Hindutva is indeed deep, societal indeed. And to return to the statu quo ante will not be easy. So the state politics of Uttar Pradesh, for instance, has to be scrutinized for responding to this question. And more importantly, the opposition has to realize that it's not only winning elections that matters. They have to recreate a social movement. And I say recreate because I think that Congress, during the freedom struggle, was much more than a political party. It was a social movement. And this is exactly the kind of ambition its leaders should have if they want to make sure that some return to the secular atmosphere of not the 90s even, not the 80s even, but probably the 70s and the 60s could be restored. It's a long-term agenda. It's a difficult task, but it's not an impossible task. I think some of the leaders are already very much aware of that, but the problem of politics is that you have to deliver quickly. So you are looking for shortcuts always, instead of embarking on long-term projects. Ideally, some of them should focus on the long-term projects and let others deal with the governance. That is the kind of division of labor we saw when Mahatma Gandhi on the one hand and Jawaharlal Nehru on the other hand somewhat divided the job. That's the kind of modus operandi that may need to be repeated for the question you're asking to be responded to in a sustainable manner.
Well, thank you very much. Let's see if this scenario emerges in the next few years or decades, maybe. Let's only hope so. Thank you very much for your very detailed replies and for your book, of course.
Thank you.